Thanks, Ben. It's lovely to join you. Thanks for having me.
My first question, Kirsty, relates to your original interest in getting into vitamin D supplementation in rugby players. Where did that come from? Was it led by you as a researcher, or was it from the players themselves?
It's probably a bit of both. At the time, I was balancing two roles, one of which was the consultant sports dietitian to the Highlanders Super Rugby franchise, and to one of the 2 or 3 feeder teams into that, which was the Otago Rugby Football Union, as well as being a consultant, or as well as being a researcher and lecturer at the University of Otago in sports nutrition with the Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism Research Group. So I could see there'd been some research coming out about vitamin D status in athletes, and it was suggesting with associations between vitamin D status and performance. And I looked at where we were living, and some information had been coming out about Otago and Southland. This partly answers your second question, actually, about the vitamin D status of general New Zealanders, and we were a little bit low. We're prone to being a bit low as well. And so being the sports dietitian that I am, you're always looking to find out if there's a nutrient that you can boost and improve performance with. So it looked quite exciting, and so I thought it was a great idea, and then I went off to work and sold it to the rugby players as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, and you started to answer my second question a little bit. You've conducted this study right at the sort of southern end of the southern island of New Zealand, around Otago and its surrounds. And so how important was that sort of geography in terms of you making the decision to work with vitamin D?
Yeah, it was really important because we are quite far south in our latitude. We're sort of further south than 45, 46 degrees south. Not much work had been done on vitamin D status for the southern latitudes. There's a lot obviously done in the northern hemisphere. And our annual nutrition survey that was done in 2008 and 2009 had inferred that about 32% of southern New Zealanders were going to have low vitamin D status, or below 50 nanomoles per litre. So I recognise that there's a potential for athletes to be low, and I was combining that with some of the research coming out looking at sports performance or strength and power and how that relates to vitamin D status, and thought, well, I better have a look at this in case it's something that we should be doing in our athletes in practice.
Yeah, and that's an important point, is I guess contextualising your research to the particular area that you live and the particular surroundings that you have. And you did highlight in your introduction that, in your area that there were sort of lower levels of vitamin D status across sort of different subpopulations. But in your particular trial, you didn't necessarily have individuals who were vitamin D deficient. Is that right? And how much of their initial status of vitamin D do you think then went on and influenced what you found in the study?
Yeah, I think it was a really big factor. We were quite surprised by the really good vitamin D status of our athletes. I think the only thing that I can take away from that is that they must have had fantastic summer holidays where they were out and about in central Otago and Queenstown, Wanaka, sunning themselves up nicely and zipping around on boats, no doubt. So that by the time we were doing that study in mid to late March that we started, they still all had really good vitamin D status. So the mean across both groups was about 94 nanomoles per litre. And I think that's a fundamental, actually. I think that's a really big learning from this. With a randomised controlled trial, you don't baseline screen, you just enrol everybody as they are. And then you wait and see whether or not your intervention has an impact. And as we found, they still had great vitamin D status. And as a result of that, I think that the vitamin D supplementation, even though it improved vitamin D status in the group that received vitamin D tablets, it didn't have any impact on performance. And so I think there really has to be a clear segregation in whether or not you should be vitamin D supplementing your athletes based on their baseline vitamin D status. That's the big learning that we probably took away from that.
Yeah. And I guess that leads you to the, what would you do differently the next time? Obviously getting involved in these sorts of trials, huge amount of hours involved and dedication required. So what have you taken away from that you think, is a critical learning?
Yeah, I guess it was a difficult balance because our vitamin D status in New Zealand hits its nadir, if you like, or its worst levels in August and September. And we weren't really able to do the study in that time frame because the rugby union franchises wouldn't have been doing performance testing at that time of year. So we kind of had to, I guess as you do, make a compromise when you do your research in the field. So we needed to do it at the time of the year when they were doing regular performance testing, so that we added minimum respondent burden to the participants. And so that was in pre-season, which was March, April, May, when obviously their vitamin D status was quite good. It would be really nice to be able to repeat this study and to do it through winter, but I don't think I'd ever get performance measures. I think the best performance outcome I could come up with that would be game statistics, which is a little bit hard to control for a randomized controlled trial. So it doesn't really make it feasible for us.
Yeah, okay. And so obviously when you get involved in a study of this nature, you also spend a lot of time with the athletes and the coaches and the team sort of management. Has the outcome from that experience led to sort of new endeavours, future work, or has it changed your relationship with the athletes that you work with?
Yeah, it did a little bit. It probably strengthened the relationship that I had with the athletes I was working with to a degree. I think it really helped them see their practitioner come up with a research idea that if it worked was going to be really valuable to them. They were all quite interested, and that this was such an easy fix for them in the context of sports nutrition. You know, we're always asking them to eat certain different kinds of foods, and this was a tablet that we were going to have to give them or send them outside in the sunshine. So if it worked, they were all for it. It was going to be great. So that helped. Also, I think I gave them, I worked hard to give them all individual reports with their own vitamin D status, how that compared to the group, what happened across the study, and their own performance data, because I wanted to make sure that it was as positive an experience for them as possible. It was interesting. Recruitment was difficult because even though rugby union's almost synonymous with pain, really, as a sport, they weren't too keen to give up blood samples, and so that was probably the hardest aspect of recruiting. But once I sold them onto that, or once I found the participants that were happy to do that, it was all go. And then, of course, it helps build the relationship and rapport between the dietitian and the strength and conditioning staff, because they can see that you're actively looking for solutions for that squad.
Fantastic. Kirsty, thank you for joining us on the Humans of Sports Nutrition series. We encourage anyone who's interested in vitamin D and contact sports, sprint performance, to check out your paper in the December edition. Thanks very much.
Thank you.